Hi everyone, my name is Shyla. I'm the Health Educator and Training Specialist here at the Student Community Leadership and Development Unit.
And hello, my name is Mayu and I am the Health Education Assistant. And we're both here to talk to you on behalf of the Health Education and Promotion team. Today we're going to train you on an important topic regarding student mental health and well-being and how your role as a peer leader can support it. But first, we'll start off by letting you know a little about what we do here.
So you might have heard or seen health ed at some point during your studies, or you might have not ever heard of us at all. We often wear the green shirts, our peers do, and we also run a resource center called the Wellness Hub, which Maya will speak to. And our main goal is really to provide kind of upstream factors through programming around preventing and supporting student health on campus. So that encompasses all aspects around like health that is like really holistic. And the way that we do that is through outreach, workshops, and trainings like this one. And we educate on various topics that are not limited to mental health, physical health, sleep, nutrition, alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs. And we work with many different campus partners, including staff, faculty, and various units to provide customized trainings and opportunities to just really reach and connect with students.
Health education is actually part of the Student Community Leadership Development Department. You may or may not know that we actually have a resource center called the Wellness Hub that Shyla just mentioned. It's located beside the Lost and Found in the Ross Building and operates in the fall and winter semester. At the Wellness Hub, students can connect with our very own peers to get access or advice on any resources both on and off campus. This could include mental health support or physical resources like sexual health and menstruation products. For the updated operating hours, make sure to check out our websites.
Okay, so what's your agenda for today? I'm just going to quickly go over what we're going to be covering. We're going to raise your awareness about some of the issues that our incoming students are facing, especially from high school to university. And we're broadly going to talk about the impact on mental health and academic life. We're also going to review a very practical tool called the TALK model. It's really designed to train you on the steps needed to have conversations about mental health and support someone who might be in distress or crisis. We're going to learn different resources on campus and how we might be able to refer to them for ourselves or if we're supporting others as well.
We are also going to learn about the importance of taking care of yourselves in order to take care of your duties and others. And lastly, we'll go through some scenarios to test your knowledge around how to support students who may be in distress and how much you've retained throughout our training. On that note, let us begin.
So what does student health have to do with your role on campus? So we know why we're here today, but we want you to take this time to reflect on why this might pertain to your role particularly. So my colleague Mayu, who is most recently a York grad and now alumni, was serving as a student leader with the Red Zone. Maybe Mayu, you can share your perspective as a very, very recent student of how your role impacted the way that your relationship to student mental health on campus.
Of course. I would say being in contact with so many students on a daily basis made me really want to help the York community the best I can. I was a Red Zone student ambassador for 2 years, and it really did a lot of good for me. Through a lot of experience, I realized the energy we put out there as student leaders really has a major impact on students' well-being. I also learned that to upkeep the mental health of my fellow peers, it was important to upkeep myself first and foremost.
Yeah, I think that part of why we're doing this training more broadly today is because regardless of your position, regardless of your title, whether you just work at York, whether you're a volunteer, or you just identify as a student, what's most important to recognize is that we all have mental health, and as a community, this gives an opportunity to all of us to recognize and respond and support others who might be struggling with their mental health. And that's kind of why we want you to reflect on what your role might have to do with that today.
Now let's talk about student transition. We know that transitioning from high school to university can be challenging for students. As you folks have all gone through the experience yourselves, consider some things that students tend to find difficult when transitioning to university. To give you some examples, some areas of difficulties that students may endure could be academics, career issues, making friends or relationships, finances, balancing school and work, or dealing with the lack of structure within university.
So transition can be tough. So much of the data that we're going to explore today comes from the 2016 National College Health Assessment, also known as NACHA, which is a nationwide survey that is sent to post-secondary students that occurs every 3 to 4 years. So the survey really looks at the impact of student life and student success. And this data that really captures the health impacts is the way that we drive much of our programming here at Health Ed, as well as across the university, and how we can kind of orient those supports around the campus to really speak to the data. So as peer leaders, you're going to encounter students at various stages of transition. So we want you to just be aware of some of these challenges that students are commonly facing. So that's why the first set of data says, within the last 12 months, have any of the following been traumatic or difficult to handle? And that's a really key word, traumatic or difficult to handle. And we take that pretty seriously. So you can see that academics, finances, family problems, career-related issues, they're all kind of falling between the 40 to 60% mark. So this is what students are commonly facing at York. But I also want to bring your attention to the Canadian data that's side by side. And you'll notice that the variance is not that much. It might be a couple percentage off, but these are really what we're capturing across Canada and specifically at York, some of the challenges the students are having as they come into our campuses.
Now, academics prove to be a major stressor for students as well. So through further research, we found the top 6 factors that students said impacted their academic performance. And these factors prove to be stress, sleep difficulties, anxiety, internet use and computer games, depression, and work. Again, as student leaders, you may have understanding or perspective on this from your own student experience. Mm-hmm. Looking at the rankings, you can tell that stress takes number 1 at 42.9%. Sleep difficulties appears next at 24.9%. And anxiety takes the 3rd place spot at 32.4%. Ooh. These percentages are all in terms of the York specific student population, just as Shyla mentioned. And if you were to compare them side by side with the Canadian data, you can see that there is some similarity, give or take. So just consider it to yourself and ask yourself, does any of this sound familiar to you as a York student?
Okay, so we're going to share some more stats with you. We want you to reflect on the following questions. These are the same questions that we have shared with York students through the survey as well. Within the last 12 months, have you
ever felt overwhelmed by all you had to do?
Felt very lonely?
Felt overwhelming anxiety?
Felt that things were hopeless?
Or felt so depressed it was difficult to function?
So this is the kinds of questions that we asked the NACHA survey asked to York students as well as the Canadian students. And like with our other data points, these are York stats, but you can see that the Canadian column is almost identical. So whether you're a Queen student or a U of T student, across the country, these are some of the feelings of overwhelm and just like really what's impacting mental health on campuses is commonly shared. I also want to draw your attention to the bottom of the list. As you can see, those 2 stats, felt so depressed it was difficult to function, but also the ones that say seriously considered suicide or attempted suicide can be pretty alarming and shocking for some. And for others, it might be completely relatable. Overall, we share these numbers with you because of the ongoing concern we have for student mental health and the importance it has around creating a community of support where we can be really transparent about the real matters around mental health issues and being able to have conversations about it. Here at Health that we try to do a number of trainings to support those upstream factors to support mental health, including two programs called Safe Talk and Assist, which are suicide awareness and intervention programs. In case you or someone else might be interested in participating in those, to learn specifically how to support yourself or others around those two factors.
As a peer leader supporting other students, you yourself may have built up assumptions or perceptions about the student community around you. And that's totally okay. These next slides will review and challenge our existing perspectives and perceptions, and Shyla and I will debrief how this would apply to your role as a student leader.
Okay, so the national survey also asks about perceptions around student behavior, such as alcohol consumption. Take a moment and ask yourself, what percentage of York students do you think used alcohol within the last 30 days? And the answer is. So when we do this in real life, I can tell you without a doubt, it's between 85 to 100% that people will put their guesses, when in reality, only 52.4% of students on this campus even use alcohol in the last 30 days. The second part of this is, what percentage of your students do you think have never used alcohol? And the answer is, most people think it's like 7%, 2%, 5%. And in reality, it's almost close to 30%. So this might be, sometimes it's a bit of a shock to be like, what? How could these numbers be so different? There might be a number of factors related to this assumption. And this could be because university students are perceived to be drinking because there's this mainstream idea of what university culture is. And it's often portrayed in the media and entertainment. But perceptions are not always reality.
That brings us to our next point. Ooh, the numbers.
Well, we've given that away, but I guess that's okay. We'll continue.
Okay. All right. Can we pause? Okay, fix that. Now, let's take a look at cannabis. Continuing with the same game, let's take a guess, or just look at the answers right here, of what percentage of York students you think used cannabis in the last 30 days. As you can see in the perception, it says that approximately 83.7% of students have used cannabis in the last 30 days, when in reality, 10.1% tested that they have used it in 30 days. Of course, this is a survey, so keep in mind that there is a fluctuation, give or take. Next, you can look at what percentage of students that York students think have never used cannabis before. The perception was 12.2%, when the reality was actually 70.9%. To give a disclaimer, it is important to keep in mind that this survey was conducted in 2016 before the legalization of cannabis. The survey was conducted entirely anonymously, but it will be interesting to see what will change with the 2019 and 2020 data. To give context on why we show these slides and comparisons and what makes it all important, here it goes. It's important to know that there's an assumption or expectation that all university students are doing these things, and when in reality, it may not be the case. This is important to consider when engaging with incoming students who may feel pressures to behave a certain way. We want them to make their own choices based on reality, not misconceptions or false notions.
Okay, so now we're going to move into defining mental health.
So,
Maya, do you want to read that one for us?
yeah. So just ask yourself, how do you define mental health and what does it mean to you? We found one definition provided by the World Health Organization that we thought really fits. Mental health, this is how it went. Mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. The truth is, the mental health is a massive concept that involves many components, so there isn't just one definition. It's also a personal subject, so it can be subjective. We really like this definition because it mentions a state of well-being, focuses on community, and people reaching their own potential.
Cool. So in a few moments, I'm going to introduce you to a model called the mental health continuum. But before I do, I want to draw a very simple analogy to mental health and physical health. And this is actually something one of my former senior peers came up with. The truth is that we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. For example, if I don't drink enough water throughout the day, what's going to happen to my body? For me, I'm going to get this feeling of fatigue, maybe I'll get a headache, and I might start to experience something called poor physical health. And over time, that could lead to physical illness, example, dehydration. So when we think about physical health, we all have it. It's just the same way we think about mental health. We all have it. The quality of both our physical and mental health can change and can vary depending on various factors. So this is just an example to provide that type of analogy before I get into the next slide, which is called the mental health continuum. Okay, so here's the mental health continuum. It can be a little bit of a tricky slide. There's lots of arrows and a lot of words on that, but we're gonna kind of go through it and break it down for you. Mental health is on a continuum or a spectrum. We can see this through the vertical line. That is called mental health. At the bottom of this line, you'll see that it says poor mental health or languishing, and the top of the line, it says optimal or flourishing mental health. Since it's on a spectrum, any person at any time can be anywhere on this point. And it's also important to note that mental health is not mental illness. However, there is a spectrum of mental illness, and a person can fall any point on this line as well. And this is represented by the horizontal axis. The only difference is that at some point on this line, someone might be actually diagnosed with a mental illness, and someone may not actually be diagnosed or showing any symptoms of a mental illness. So again, it can depend on where you fall on the line. What is really important is that, for example, a person with a mental illness can have optimal mental health, and they can thrive in school if they have the right supports, like friends, family, maybe they're taking some kind of therapy or medication, and they have those tools that they need to succeed. And just the opposite is true. Someone could have very poor mental health, feel very lonely, unmotivated, stressed, even without a mental illness or mental illness diagnosis. If they don't have the right supports, like if they're struggling with school, they don't have a lot of friends or community, they don't know how to ask for help or where to go for help, or they're dealing with a really incredible transition in their life or a really big challenge. So having poor mental health does not mean this person has to have a mental illness. And I'm going to let Mayu just recap all of that.
Thank you for that explanation, Shyla. So that may be a lot to take in, but don't worry, we'll recap the takeaways right now. What you should keep in mind is that mental health and mental illness are not the same thing, but they can impact each other. Both mental health and mental illness are on a continuum or a spectrum. A person with a diagnosed mental illness can have optimal mental health and flourish if they have the right supports and resources. A person with no mental illness can still have poor mental health if they don't have the right supports and resources. If you take anything from this, know that everyone has mental health that needs to be taken care of. It can change from day to day, and we can have bad mental health days without having a mental illness. Now, here's the talk model. So far, we've gone through data about our own student community. The next part of our presentation will show you a model we use to talk to students through such issues. You can use these next steps to talk to any students about mental health or when someone is in distress. Students may need help, but at the same time, they may not verbalize it. But keep in mind that you can still help in whatever way you can. We use the talk model to help guide these conversations and ensure the person feels supported along the way. The acronym TALK also helps us not miss steps. This model specifically emphasizes the importance of having awareness, learning to listen actively, to identify the specific concerns the student has, validating their concerns, and then guiding them to the helpful resources they require. You may choose to use this model on the job here at York or even in your daily life.
Okay, so as Mayu said, the talk model is here for you and you can use it to help anyone in need, and it's applicable across various situations. I also want to point that talk, the acronym TALK has two meanings. First of all, it highlights the importance to talk about mental health. This is the best way to break down stigma, to have open and compassionate conversations about mental health. Secondly, it stands for the steps that we're going to teach you: tell, ask, listen, and connect. So tell is someone tells you or you notice signs of crisis. Ask is ask questions and begin to assess risk. Listen. This is where we listen, observe, and gather information.
The final step is to connect with a K. Connect individual with a resource and self-care. Remember, we don't need to solve the issue because that's not our responsibility. That's why the connect step is so important. Now, the first step is tell. Tell can mean two things. An individual may tell you something that makes you think they're in distress or in crisis, or you also want to tell the individuals the things that you notice about their behavior to start that conversation yourself. When you see a distressed student, think to yourself, what are the signs that you see? Or what are some things you can look out for? What are some things you might notice? What might you see or hear from someone? Things you can see may include that you notice someone crying, yelling, withdrawing from a group, writing concerning messages on social media, participating in risky or disruptive behavior, or much more. Things you can hear may include that you hear someone saying they're feeling lonely, sad, scared, worried, highly stressed, or even anxious. Things people share with you may include the sharing of a history of mental health issues, or that they're going through some major life transitions. A lot of that happens in university. So transitions can be transition from high school to university, international transitions, a breakup, death of a loved one. You really never know. So tells can be verbal or nonverbal. Sometimes you just get a sense that something is wrong. So listen to your gut. If you feel in yourself that someone is going through something, reach out. It's better to know that if they need help or not than to not know at all. There's honestly no harm in showing concern. Now, once we have begun the conversation with the individual based on what we have noticed or heard, it is important we move on to the next step, which is to ask.
Okay, so what have your experiences been when you're supporting someone who is upset or distressed? Do you find that you try to read between the lines? So sometimes reading between the lines is something that we all do, right? Because we are worried about somebody. But we might also be risking taking the assumption or jumping to the wrong conclusion about the situation. That's why it's very important that we ask. For example, my colleague Mayu is super energetic and bubbly. And when I'm at the office and I see her, she always greets me, she's always smiling, she's always asking me about her day. But if some of her tell signs were, she was withdrawing, she didn't want to look up from her screen, she was avoiding me, I will start noticing that there's some kind of concern I have. Rather than me assuming what's going on, this is my perfect opportunity to clarify and ask. So, why is it important to ask? It's a way to gather more information, it's a way to get clarity, it's a way to confirm versus making assumptions about a situation. And it's also a way to assess what the needs of the situations are and the level of risk. It's also a way that you're really opening that dialogue more fruitfully for the individual so that they can work out the situation themselves. Asking can help the individual process what's going on. It can help them gain some perspective. Individuals may start to problem solve and they might even come up with the next steps that they need to take or to find solutions. It's also just a way to recognize if they need more help or are seeking resources, that it's a little bit easier for us to make that connection. So there's lots of ways you can have an ask. It's through open dialogue, it's having open-ended questions. And like Maya mentioned before, it really has to come from a non-judgmental, non-confrontational place. It allows the individual to take time to answer the questions, which sometimes requires a degree of patience on what's happening, depending on what's happening. So in order for people to feel more comfortable to share with us and not feel judged, when asking, really come from that place of compassion and use the tell signs. So that could be like using the 5 W's here, right? But it could also just, for myself personally, when I'm in the ask phase, I will sometimes use the tell signs as a way to open the conversation to show that person concern. So if I notice that my colleague Mayu was feeling withdrawn, I might actually say to her, "Hey Mayu, I noticed that you're like feeling like you're looking like you're a bit withdrawn today, or that, your body language is telling me that something is going on. Are you okay? Or do you want to talk about it?" So it's not that it has a perfect formula for ask. It really depends on your approach to it and how you just want to enter the conversation with compassion and care for the person, but really also trying to gather enough information to just be able to fully check on them.
Okay. Now the next step is to listen, and we have a lot to say on this. Listening is an important step because it's what allows the individual to tell you more about themselves and about their situation. It allows the individual to feel heard and that their feelings are being validated. So before we get into it, here's a brief video on listening.
Yeah.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you.
Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just
Don't.
try to see things.
Now, after watching that video, take a moment to consider what you noticed. What we had gathered was that her partner really didn't listen to her. He may have known the answer, but it wasn't really his place to share it, especially when he hadn't made her feel heard yet. In your role as a student leader, it's not your responsibility to take out the nail. Leave that to the nail experts. You can help by listening to the difficulties. It's important that you actively listen when speaking with someone and ask questions. Often when we listen, because we want to help them as much as we can, we jump to responding and offering resources, which shouldn't be the case. The problem there is when you do that, you often miss information that could be important to a person's story or how they're feeling. Consider how might that person feel? Maybe as if you're rushing them along, or that their feelings don't matter. People will be a lot more willing to accept the resources you offer if you take the time to hear them out first. That's why this step is crucial. For example, a person says something and you know the appropriate resource for them or want to respond to them at that specific point. You start focusing on that instead of continuing to listen to the individual. Before moving on to the next slide, let's take a moment to consider what active listening looks like to you.
Okay, active listening. You've probably all heard about this a million times. It's something that is super important when we're helping really listen and particularly capture what that person is going through. I also want to point out that active listening can actually be very, very difficult. Even our colleagues at counseling will admit that it's still a difficult skill to master. And so we've come up with a few tips to help it make it a little bit easier. What are the ways that we can show that we are listening? I like to think of it almost opposite, like what are the ways that I know someone's not listening to me or when I'm not really feeling heard? And it could be their body language, if someone's, turning away from me or checking their phone or being distracted or looking everywhere else but at me. I will know that I'm not really fully feeling super comfortable to share all the things. So sometimes thinking about what you need to feel listened to can be a good start. And I'm also going to share a couple of these tips here. So being attentive. Make sure you're being attentive to the person in distress. And how are you giving them the attention? Asking open-ended questions. And what are open-ended questions? They're questions that don't just, ask for a yes or no. So if I ask my colleague Mayu, you're doing okay, right? I'm already in my question have kind of closed that off. I've only given her an option of either saying, yeah, I'm fine, or I guess, or no. And it doesn't really allow me to fully understand what's happening because it's just a yes or a no. We can also ask probing questions, and the probing questions can be why. Why are you doing this? Or what's happening for you? Or why are you upset, right? Now we want to be really careful because the why can sometimes sound accusatory. So think of questions more like, what do you think that this situation made you feel that way? Can be another approach of asking a probing question. Request clarification. If you aren't clear on something the person said, you can ask for clarity. There's no harm in that. It's better to fully understand what that conversation that you're having than to assume what the conversation really is about. Paraphrase. Paraphrase the things a person is saying to really ensure you understand. This is one of my favorite things. So if someone's saying something, I like to repeat it back to them in my own words to see if I've really captured what they're saying. Being attuned and reflect their feelings. I know this might be very obvious, but sometimes it's super important because we don't really understand the fullness of the situation. So if someone is, displaying behavior that makes us think that they might be upset, it's good to ensure that we're not just sitting there with a big old smile on our face, and just like nodding and like being almost, too overexcited. We want to really be able to match what their emotions are in that state. Finally, summarize. This is something that you want to do, especially near the end of a conversation, to ensure that you've heard everything that they needed to say, and everything that you need to know before moving on to the next step. Once you feel like you've heard enough of what that person has to say to really understand the situation of what kind of resources they might need, it's time to move to the final stage, which is connect.
Now the final stage. Now, we've noticed distress, asked the appropriate questions, and actively listened to the answers. The final step is to connect with a K. In the connect phase, we want to connect the student with the appropriate resource. Along the way, you might find yourself in one of two situations. A situation may be non-urgent or urgent. If you determine a situation is non-urgent, then it is likely that the student simply needs to be connected to a resource on campus. This can take place over time and is usually something that the student can do themselves with a bit of guidance and information.
Whereas urgent situations are situations that are out of control or the person is at risk. The most important part of engaging with the student is knowing if the student shares something with you that you can't actually promise secrecy. Especially if there's a serious problem, you really must tell someone and be able to get them the help that they need. What you can do to create that connection and the trust with the student is you can promise discretion, you can act from a place of compassion and with sensitivity, but you cannot keep secrets. You can tell the person that you will only notify the supports that need to know and that can help the student further. Example, some experts or specific campus supports. If you promise that you won't tell anyone what they tell you, you're also potentially ruining the connection you have with that student. And I also think it's really important, especially in urgent situations, that you don't make that promise because it really is out of the scope of your practice. You as student leaders are really there to ensure that you make that right connection to the right resource, but you can't take on the huge responsibility of really helping that student beyond the scope of your own role. So it's also helpful for yourself and for their safety that piece has been really clarified to them.
Now,
so we're going to look at some non-urgent situations and resources first, and then we're going to take a deeper dive on the more urgent scenarios.
So, from your experiences, think of some resources that you've referred students to or would refer students to in the future. Here's a list of few resources you can connect a student with on campus or even off campus. We'll go over each resource so you can become more aware for the next time you refer someone or even if you need to use any of the resources. The first resource is SCD, also known as the Student Counseling and Development Services. It's located at the Bennett Center and is available during regular York hours, which is 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. If a student is in crisis, walk them over to personal counseling services and let the front desk know that the student is in a crisis. This will ensure that the students will be seen and addressed within the next 20 minutes. The next resource is OSCAR. It's the Office of Student Community Relations. OSCAR can provide support and resources to students for a variety of concerns. They're able to provide academic accommodations, financial assistance, and emergency housing as needed. Next is residence. If a student lives in residence and requires any sort of assistance, you may connect them with a Dawn or the residence life coordinator for their building. Next is academic resources. A ton of students at any university would require some sort of resource. So here at York, we offer a ton of academic resources that you can refer students to, and a few are listed on the slide. It can range from learning skills workshops, the Learning Commons at Scott Library, or even the Writing Center. Next, if a student says they want to be more involved or make some new friends, let them know of the clubs and organizations we have available at York. Let them know about UConnect and YorkFest as ways to get involved in the over 300 clubs on campus.
I also want to point out the 2 resources on this list that are also available off campus, which is the Good to Talk. And Good to Talk is a helpline that students can call 24/7. Any post-secondary student can access it. And they also have just released a text service, so they can also use that same website to text to get support to counseling. The other one is What's Up Walk-In, which is a free counseling, especially off campus. So if you're supporting a student in distress and say that the student counseling and development office is not open, or they're like it's after hours, and they really need to talk to somebody, this can be a really great way to connect them. And they have locations all over the GTA, so you just go on their website and look for the closest one, and before you refer them. We also have student financial services. So as you know, they are there to provide any concerns or questions about payment schedules, grants, bursaries, OSAP. But they also have emergency funding. So if you are finding that somebody really does require more than just, like they really do require some kind of emergency funding or funding for housing or food, this is something that they might be able to access as well. The Career Center. So if people that you are supporting or someone you're supporting is looking for work either on or off campus, they can go to the Career Center website. They also provide workshops and resumes support, as well as cover letter writing. And they can really help translate co-curricular experiences to your resume. And so they're a really great resource for that. And as we shared with you earlier, career stress is really real for our students, and it can be a really huge source of relief as well. And finally, the center, which stands for the Center for Sexual Violence and Response Office. And this is a space that coordinates and supports resources to all members of the community that have experienced sexual violence. It receives disclosures and complaints, and it can facilitate with both safety planning and assist survivors through the complaint process. And it's also located on the 3rd floor of York Lanes. That's the physical location.
Now, in case you forgot any of the resources we mentioned, because we do know we addressed a lot, you can access all of them through the York University Safety app. The app provides contact information for the resources we've discussed, links you with the campus security, both urgent and non-urgent, updates you on safety-related matters, connects you to GoSafe, and much more. It's free on the App Store or Google Play, so we definitely recommend you looking into it so all your resources are available on your phone. Sound like an ad.
Okay, the Connect phase. I also want to mention one thing from that previous slide. All of these resources are available in a Mental Health 101 resource sheet that is going to be provided to you. The other piece of that is it's on our mental health, or on our health education website, which we'll share at the bottom, at the last screen. And you can also access all the resources we just talked about and many, many more. So the Connect phase. And so this is really addressing urgent issues. So what exactly qualifies as an urgent issue? I really always want to say it can be interpreted, but it's really when you no longer have control of the situation. So we might have different ideas of what behavior is disruptive, but as long as you or someone else is, whose safety could be compromised or is feeling unsafe, this is the same protocol. If there's violence near you or around you, something needs to be done. And again, this would be the same protocol. So I'm going to read over some of the scenarios that you might need to make a more of an urgent connect. So if someone is displaying overtly suicidal thoughts or actions, and they're referring suicide as a current option, that is definitely an urgent situation. homicidal threats or actions, or the student is engaging in highly disruptive behavior, either towards you or someone else. So that could be hostility, aggression, violence. Or if a student is unable to communicate clearly, they might be displaying garbled or slurred speech or have disjointed thoughts. Or if there's a level of a loss of contact with reality, seeing, hearing things, beliefs, or actions, anything that's greatly at odds with reality or probability. So in those types of scenarios, we want to make sure that we call 911 and security. And the reason why we encourage you to remember to call security in any of those urgent situations is that security can get on a three-way call, or even if you call security after you call 911, they can still connect with emergency services to find out where your location is and help triage to bring them to the right space, because our campus is so big and tricky to navigate. If you forget all of this because it's in the moment, you don't remember security's number, that's okay. You can call either, that's fine, but if you can remember to call both, it can usually expedite the resources a little bit faster. We also want to share this slide because it's really important that we don't attempt to diagnose or label a situation. So for example, it could be that someone is having a panic attack, right? You're noticing someone's having a panic attack, but we don't know that for sure. We don't know their medical history. In fact, sometimes panic attack symptoms can be the signs of a heart attack. So the point is that we don't really know, and we need to really connect with an expert to deal with those issues. So that's something that I want to just share as an example of why you might want to make that connection.
Thank you, Shyla.
Thank you.
In all situations, but especially urgent ones, your own safety as a student leader and even a York student is your number one priority. Never put yourself or keep yourself in a situation that could be dangerous for you. Your safety is your priority. If you're feeling unsafe, do not feel as though you must stay in a situation because you don't have to. Get or call for help if you feel as though you are no longer safe in a situation. All these rules apply to yourself as well. Okay, now we're going to be going through a few scenarios using the talk model. We also want to identify if the connect phase is urgent or non-urgent. So let's practice. We're going to go through each step of the talk model. So for each scenario, we want you to consider, what are the tell signs you're noticing? What kinds of open-ended questions are you going to ask? What will you do to encourage the listen step? And what resource will you connect them to? The way you can put your new skills to action is by practicing now. So here's our first scenario. A student approaches you and says they are not feeling well and feel very tired recently. They ask for pamphlets and information on iron deficiencies and thyroid testing. They look pale and unwell and are not able to keep focus on the conversation and have difficulty with balance as they are communicating with you. Now, to go through the talk model, going through the tell phase, ask yourself, what are the tell signs they're showing you? I could say, it's clear that the student is not feeling well. They've been tired recently and are asking for more information on certain topics. What seems to cast over everything else is that they've said that what seems to go past everything that they've said is that they're looking pale and are not able to focus on the conversation at hand. They're having difficulty balancing as they're communicating with you as well. This tell about their physical well-being tells you that this may be an urgent situation. Seeing the urgency, you can then proceed to ask probing questions concerning the scenario, such as, are you physically okay to continue this conversation? How long have you been feeling this way? You want to ask this because you want to know whether or not they would be able to carry out the interaction in its entirety. When they answer, make sure to listen to what they're saying, but also pay attention to any sort of physical cues they may give you. because the physical cues is what gave you tell signs in the first place. From what you gather from the situation, you may realize that the student requires immediate medical attention. If there is another peer nearby, whether on your team or not, ask for help in assisting the peer. Then you can proceed on to call 911 and security, as Shyla mentioned. This is one way this situation can possibly go, but still expect that no situation is predictable. You can see how at any point in the talk model, you may figure out the urgency of the situation. It's important to go with your gut.
Great. Okay, so our next scenario here is a student discloses that they have mental illness, and they've already spoke with our counseling services. They have an upcoming appointment with SCD in a few weeks, but they feel that they cannot wait that long. They feel they really need to talk to someone immediately. So if we're going to look at the tell signs, there's a couple of pieces of information that we already know. They've told us that they've been to counseling before, and they're living with a mental illness or mental health diagnosis, right? They also are expressing a level of urgency in their tone of voice, and that they communicate that they cannot wait for another appointment. So this should give us a cue that this might actually be quite an urgent situation, and we want to immediately move to the ask phase. So what kinds of questions could we ask them in the moment, right? We can ask them, what are you feeling right now? Can you share more about what you're going through? What kind of supports are you getting outside of this therapeutic context? Really trying to find out what is it, the urgency that they're feeling in the moment, and to kind of really get that information. So we're using our active listening skills through the listen phase. We're really giving them that attention. We might be paraphrasing or clarifying so that we have a very clear idea of what they're disclosing to us. And finally, the connect phase. So depending on the level of conversation they have, even by this small example alone, we're going to assume this person might actually be having thoughts of suicide or self-harm. And we might want to connect them immediately to emergency services. We also would want to let the student know how important it is that they're sharing this very, very vulnerable and courageous information with us, and that we cannot promise secrecy, but we are going to make sure we can get them connected to the right services. So that's how we might want to interpret this scenario. And I will let Mayu take the last one.
Okay, this should be a breeze after what we've gone through. During an event, you've noticed a student who doesn't seem to be enjoying themselves or participating. After engaging them in a conversation, the student shares that they attended the event because they hoped to get more information about academics and how to succeed. They are feeling stressed and overwhelmed with the transition of becoming a university student. They mentioned they aren't sure how they're going to keep up with all their courses. What can we tell about the situation? You can tell that the student is engaged from the group, and they have felt overwhelmed with the transition to university. What questions can we ask them? We can ask, is there anything I can do to support you? What were you specifically hoping to learn about academic resources? What are you most worried about? Next, what are some ways we can show that we are actively listening? In talking to them, we can use eye contact, nodding, open body posture, reciprocating their energy, and summarizing exactly what they're telling us back to them to make sure that they feel heard. Lastly, what resources can you connect them with? I would say because they are seeking academic resources and wanting to learn how they can balance school, you may connect them with learning skills, time management workshops, or even student counseling and development for individual counseling or a workshop as needed, or even college resources such as past sessions, or library workshops, or even their residence dawn.
So I think for all of the scenarios that we shared, you're going to draw on the resources that you're most comfortable and the most known. But the most important part of all of that is really, again, just trying to make sure that that connect piece is happening, right? So even if it's connecting with your supervisor or someone who might be more of a senior peer in your department or area, you might get some more ideas of the types of resources. So you don't have to be an expert at it. It's more just making sure that you're really capturing the conversation and that you can get some support and really making that connection. Last but not least of this type of scenarios is just reminding you about boundaries, right? Being aware of your own personal boundaries and your professional limitations. And I think I mentioned that a couple of times already. One, we already talked about not keeping any secrets from anybody. And also as a student, right, if somebody wants more of your attention, time, or energy, that is a choice that you want to give, and it's never going to be an obligation, right? That's something that you can decide of how much engagement you want to have with this person who might be in a crisis situation, and how much of that relationship do you want to continue even after the scenario has resolved itself. That's why we have the connect step to really give the individual plenty of other resources that might be appropriate for them. As a person's well-being should not completely fall on your shoulders alone. We also need us to take care of ourselves just as much, which is why we're going to talk a little bit more about self-care in the next couple of slides.
Sounds good. Now, this slide is significant on its own, and I'll tell you why. It emphasizes that the procedure you must follow if oxygen masks fell through in an airplane is that it's a prime example of what taking care of yourself really means. Only if you help yourself, only then is it possible to help others. If you choose not to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, you will not have what it takes to save your fellow surrounders. Thus, before all else, take care of yourself first. As simple as that.
Okay, so self-care, such a popular word. It's one of my favorite things to present about. I think that the first step of any type of self-care is really our own awareness of what our needs are, right? And that's the best way we can apply. So sometimes my question for all of you is, how do you know that you're stressed? How do you know you're overwhelmed? How do you even know you need to practice self-care or take a break? So just take a moment and think about what are the signs within yourself that let you know that you're headed towards feeling that kind of burnout, overwhelm, or even stress. What physical, sensory, or cognitive ways that you can tell that you're beginning to start feeling that stress creep in. So unfortunately, there's no magical fairy that comes to you in those moments to tell you to take a break or take a walk or to set boundaries or when to rest or when to eat. Usually what ends up happening is that we get so stressed and that we get so stressed that whatever that we're dealing with, that it just leads to extreme burnout because we haven't really been taking care of ourselves. So if we start to attune to those signs earlier, we can actually start practicing self-care. So what I mean by that is there's always some cues that we know that we might be facing that are a little bit different than our normal coping cues. So for example, for myself, I know I'm feeling a bit stressed, overwhelmed when my throat gets really dry or I get like a tightness in my jaw. And from a behavior perspective, I can get very snappy. Like I can get very snappy and like short-circuited. So that's like usually my cue to be like, oh, I think it's time to put down, press the gas a little bit, just slow down a little bit because this is not a good sign for myself. I don't know for you, Mayu, what are the ways that you know that you're headed towards a stress state or that you're in a stress state?
I would say I know I'm in a stress state when I'm not able to focus on one task at hand. Because when I am stressed, my thoughts jump from one thing to another as if on trampolines. So that's how I know that I'm not putting enough effort and quality into one area. That's how I know I'm stressed.
Yeah, and I think whatever that information is for you to just to take a moment to reflect on it, because um, there's definitely lots of practices around self-care and well-being, but if we don't acknowledge what the signals are, it's going to be very hard for us to actually have those practices, whether that's like making sure you're drinking enough water, or taking breaks. um, so we're going to kind of go over a couple of them in the next slide.
So, something to keep in mind is that there are millions of ways to engage in self-care, just as Shyla just mentioned, and different things work for different people. So instead of telling you to sleep more or get a massage, we want to introduce you to a concept called the 5 ways to well-being. These concepts can help guide the way you engage in self-care. The nice thing about these guidelines is that they may broaden your idea of what self-care can look like. For example, perhaps you run as a form of self-care, but that's all you do. These categories are meant to inspire you to expand your idea of how you can holistically support your mental well-being. So, to begin, one of the ways to well-being is to connect. And this means to talk, listen, and just be there. Research has shown that building connections can act as a buffer against poor mental health. Goals associated with a commitment to family, friends, social, and political involvements promote life satisfaction. In contrast, life goals associated with only career success and material gains were detrimental to life satisfaction. So take a minute. Think of something or someone you'd like to connect with. Maybe it's a family member or a friend, or even a pet. It's as simple as letting them know you're thinking of them and that they're important in your life. Sometimes it might feel like you don't have the time for this kind of stuff while you're in school, but it's these connections to people and loved ones that make you feel grounded.
Taking notice. Taking notice is really about pausing and reflecting on the present moment. Imagine like you're rushing from point A to B all day. You don't actually get to enjoy any of the current moment. And it's the experience of just taking simple things that can bring you pleasure and joy, like, it could be walking through nature or drinking your morning coffee if that's all the time you have. For me, it's snuggling with my little fur babies. Whatever it is for you, it's really trying to enjoy that pause, even if it's just for a few moments, right? And just be really, really present with whatever that moment is. And this state of noticing can also help you cultivate gratitude for what you do have and what is working. And that kind of reflection and pause can really be helpful for our mental well-being.
Now, the next way to well-being is to be active. We don't need to tell you or remind you that being active is hugely important for physical well-being. But to mental health, it is. It can have a profound impact on your mood. When you exercise, your body releases endorphins, which make you feel good overall. There are lots of options on campus at York to become more active. You can get a TAPE membership for just $15 a year, or even play intramurals through your college. There are lots of different options.
I also think I like that being active one, because you don't have to actually do quite a lot of sports per se to really be active. Our campus is so huge. Even if you were trying to walk around, you can just like take long walks just around campus, and that could be a simple way to be active. The next stage is keep learning. Yes, I know you're university students, learning is all you do. However, this type of learning is really about cultivating your natural curiosity, not just for marks or achievements, but really embracing new experiences and seeking out new opportunities. For some of you, learning might look like as something as relaxing and nourishing, like knitting or gardening, or something more exciting like skydiving or like learning a new language. Even if you want to try out new restaurants. For me, keep learning is like challenging myself by trying new recipes, learning how to meal prep, things like that that really make me kind of, they kind of push me a little bit, but they also have some really great rewards and benefits when I'm successful. especially because I hate cooking.
So the last way to well-being is to give back. And this doesn't have to be money. This doesn't have to be time either. I know as students, both time and money can be limited. It can be as simple as giving kind or encouraging words to someone else. Try holding the door open for someone. Try complimenting a peer you're working with in a group project. Or even treating your friend to coffee. The little things really do matter. Now that we've neared the end of the presentation, before we go, let's recap what we've covered today and what you've retained. So, you've learned how student mental health has an impact on academics. You've learned how to use the talk model to have conversations about mental health. You're now aware of available resources for students and yourself to access. And lastly, you've learned how stress can impact your lives and some self-care tips to manage your stress.
Okay, so before we conclude, I wanted to put the question slide. In a normal format, we would have a lot of back and forth, a lot of clarity about any of the processes here. So if you do have any questions, I encourage you to go on the HealthEd website, healthed.scld.yorku.ca. Not only will you find all the resources that we mentioned under our resources guide, but you can also click on the Contact Us button. And that button you can ask any questions you have, and that will go directly to myself, and our manager, Helen. Otherwise, if you wanted to contact us more directly and more privately, my manager's email is here, as well as my email as well. So with that, we just want to thank you for taking your time and going through the talk model with us today. I hope that this is useful, and we look so forward to meeting all of you in person in the next couple of months. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.